Okay.
Let me tell you.
They don't want to hear with us?
They say they can hear. I use a sump pump out of a 55-gallon barrel or a
Okay.
100-gallon, and it doesn't put out the most beautiful spray in the world, but I wet my tomato vines and everything down with it in some roots in the ground, and I hope I'm not killing.
Is that a rotary? Well, how does that sump pull?
I don't
You don't know?
how it's working.
Yeah.
I just hope that you listen.
Yeah, you got a little impeller in there that's forcing it through. And yes, you're right. You know, you may be breaking up some of the fungi and things, but you know, you're 99% of what you're doing is good, 1% of what you're doing is bad. If I get 99% of anything right, it would be a record.
Well, I'm
So-
amazed that there's
Still what Malcolm Beck
That's what mine is.
Yeah.
I have a.
has a big tank and he puts a little air pressure. I use those T-jets of the right size.
Yeah.
And I use under 20 pounds of pressure in an air tank. And I can do several acres with that.
Yeah.
So,
If you've got a tank that you can pressurize, you can put your tea in there and then you just pressurize it. Kind of same thing you do with a keg of beer. So that when you turn the tap, it comes out. Same way as spraying the compost tea out, and you're not breaking up your microbes that way.
I made mine from a 100-gallon or 150-gallon tank, a propane tank. I think I've got under $200, $150 for the valve. And it's not quite as big as Malcolm's. It's about 100 gallons bigger than mine. But all I do is fill it up. Now I hit more pressure. I go about 80 or 100 pounds. But then it'll do the whole tank. Now, Elaine says if you get over 135 pounds at a single source point, you can bust up some guys. But that's if you were spraying against a post at full force. When it's just coming through there and it's pressurized on top, I'm not sure it doesn't help keep the tea aerated.
Yeah.
But it's going to cause that tea, that oxygen to be forced into that water. So that's probably the best kind of system if you afford to get it.
Okay, one more question, and we'll move along. Yes,
You're
ma'am.
going to talk about application for the home gardener and
Sure.
doesn't have
Sure.
always-
Yeah.
That's more my thing.
Okay, let's talk about the actual process of making the compost tea. Obviously, the first thing you start with is water. Water's got some bad stuff in it when it comes out of the tap, because those same, well, not the same microbes, but we're trying to put microbes in. The city's trying to kill all the microbes that are in there. So they use usually one of two things to put in the water to turn it into bad stuff for you. They either use chlorine or they use chloramine. I think SAWS is mostly still using chlorine now.
There's one area in North San Antonio, if you live up north towards Seguin, I guess that's called north.
Yeah.
They do have an area that's been chloramined because they were below standards at the well.
Yeah.
So if you live there, it'd be a little bit more important.
The nice thing about chlorine is that it goes away naturally on its own. It bubbles away. It
It oxidizes.
yeah.
It just oxidizes away. The oxygen that's there picks it up in basically a relatively short time, especially if you'll run your aerator for a few hours
Yeah.
before you start making your tea and get that thing turned over. The chlorine will be gone. Unfortunately, chloramine doesn't go.
What we do is just we put the water in the compost tea maker and turn on the oxygen, turn on the air, I should say, and it bubbles and it bubbles and it bubbles. And within a couple of hours, the great majority of the chlorine is out of there and gone. Certainly enough is gone that you can still make good compost tea. If you are in an area and they were putting chloramine in, which I hope they're not, because chloramine reacts with organic material to make some pretty carcinogenic compounds. I don't think they should be putting this in anybody's water. But if you've got an area where bear met, I think are the ones that are using the chloramine, get some of the same drops that you put in a fish tank to take it out, and just put that into your water you're going to make your compost tea with. The first thing to do, like I say, is either get the chlorine or the chloramine out of it.
And consider, if you're only going to make for a home gardener, consider getting a rain barrel.
Yeah.
Collect 50, 55 gallons of water whenever you can, and that'll give you a good base. It really will. You don't have a problem, with chlorine, or fluoride. There's some good questions on what fluoride does to bugs.
Yes.
When you're using the drops here on the chlorine,
Uh-huh.
you have to double the amount of the directions of the bottle. Because I lived in the valley and lost all the fish that I would use.
Use twice as much of the drops as they say on the bottle to get rid of the chloramine out of the water. Fortunately, it's not very expensive material.
the moss and all in the rainwater.
Oh man, rainwater's the best stuff in the world.
I love rainwater, and I got trouble using pond water.
The green algae in it, that's okay.
That's just fine. If it's growing good algae and good mosquitoes, it's probably good healthy water. And it's just a little extra protein source. Okay, what we're going to do next is we're going to take some sort of bag, and this is just a paint strainer's bag. Get them at, you know, any paint store or any
Lowe's
box
has them for
store,
sure.
anything like that. What are they, 50 cents, 75
Yeah,
cents?
2 for $1 if you get the gallon. This is slightly larger.
Yeah.
These are 97 cents each.
We're going to put our compost in this. The reason we're putting it in here is because we want to be able to pull the compost back out after, you know, 6 or 8 hours. After having been in the bubbling water for that long, you're pretty much going to break free anything that's in there, and it's going to come out into the water. We leave the compost in there. It just means we have to strain it that much more before we can spray it out. So
We used to throw it in the bottom of the bucket, but Elaine did some studies that even though you've got good aeration, there's pockets within there that are not getting aerated, and you get a mix of aerobic and anaerobics. This gives you more surface area and more control. When I go by my bucket, I tie a hole in the top, and I just shake the string every time I walk by, just to get things going for a while before I take it out. That way you're more in control of your inoculant than if you just got the bottom of the bucket.
And in the bucket that Bruce is going to show you in a little while that he makes, if he has one in the truck, which he probably does, or in ours, if you happen to look at it, it has 2 different air sources. The one down at the bottom that bubbles all the air up through the liquid, and a second one that you actually drop down in here that's bubbling air out into the bag all the time, that's tending to break those microbes free and being sure we don't have any pockets of anaerobic activity. So the next thing we do, we're putting, you know, 1.5 quarts or so of compost in here, sticking our air hose down in it and putting it down on the top of the tea maker, be it large, be it small, whatever. And we're going to let this go for 6 or 8 hours or so to break all the microbes free from the, you know, substrate, so to speak, and get them out of the water to where they can begin reproducing, hopefully at high rates.
You want it to look like, he mentioned earlier, but remember, we want a good boiling water. If you imagine what it looks like when you boil water on the stove, you don't want it so much it's splashing out, and you don't want so you can't see everywhere that water's running all the time. Somewhere in between there. There's actually such a thing as too small of a bubble, though you'd have to work at it. But for the most part, the air stones that I use, I'm not sure how the other systems work, put out bubbles that have got a lot of surface area, but they're not so small they're going to bust up your fungus. So that's kind of just happens to work pretty good for you. She's mentioned fish. I found out if the fish need the same thing as the arrows, about 6 parts per million or so. And if you get much below that, you start losing some fish, except for tilapia. And if you start getting below that, you start losing some of your bugs. So it's kind of, if fish could live in it, you probably could grow bacteria.
Okay. So now we've got all this stuff that is in this water bath. And actually, I'll back up just a little bit. And about the same time we put the compost into the tea brewer, we're going to put something in there, or some things in there, to stimulate those microbes to reproduce. Now, it's gotten to be such a science as well as an art that nowadays some of the professionals are actually making what we refer to as designer compost teas. And
Give it Neiman Marcus.
yeah. But what this is for is if a farmer, rancher, homeowner, whatever, has a very specific problem in their land that they are trying to correct. If cottony root rot is a big problem in his field, or the melon growers, man, the melon growers have created horrible situations for themselves with some diseases they get in the soil that they simply can't get rid of. We're finding that by using different kinds of stimulants, and I don't know what all is used, but they can literally make a compost tea that will be extraordinarily effective in fighting a given insect or a given disease or a given problem. Just about anybody really gets into doing this and really gets proud of their tea and has good results, you know, they'll start getting their little recipe, and in their mind that's the only recipe to use, that's the only thing to put in there. We use a material that I have no idea what's actually in there. They just call it a catalyst, and they put